You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 11th of July. The dairy farmers are not amused. John Terry appeared in court again today for racism. Spanish reveals €65 billion in new austerity measures for Eurozone. Reports of early Caucasoid remains found in America. Russians come up with a fair solution on Syria to the UN. Thought for the day, the pain in Spain. UK news. The protests from angry dairy farmers from across the UK will soon be heard in London today. They are protesting against the drop in prices of 2p a litre, which they are paid for the milk by the leading milk processing companies Arla Foods UK, Robert Wiseman Dairies and Dairy Crest. At this drop in their price they stand to lose up to $50,000 per year and are already running most of the herds at a loss. This latest cutback is just too much for them, and the farmers face not only the decline of dairy farming, but we face the rising price of milk should some farmers be forced to sell their dairy herd for slaughter. This price cut follows hot on the heels of price cuts in the spring this year, taking many farmers into a 5p deficit on every pint of milk they produce. A World at 8 reporter comments, "It is just another nail in the coffin for our farming industry. Even the French government subsidises its dairy farms. Why can't we Brits look after our own farming industries instead of the rest of the world's? We are an island and should be more reliant on our own farms instead of paying prices abroad for importing stuff we can mostly produce for the masses over here." England football star John Terry is appearing in court again today. The England footballer is accused of racially abusing a black footballer named as Anton Ferdinand in a Premiership football match last season. John Terry is determined to win his case and has the backing of all nationalists in Britain. A World at 8 writer has commented, "Freedom of speech is attacked in Britain, and whether he said it or not, John Terry also has rights." This show trial just shows how far our establishment have come in actually manipulating everything we do and say with a racist bias, except of course if one is a person of colour. Euro news. The Spanish government under Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy is asking for more severe austerity measures from its people. The Spanish people, who have seen their economy plummet after entering the euro, will be protesting later this week against the latest measures, which consist of sales tax hikes and spending cuts aimed at shaving €65 billion off the state budget over the next 2.5 years. A day after winning European Union approval for a huge bank bailout and breathing space on its deficit programme, Rajoy warned Parliament that Spain's future was at stake as it grapples with recessions, a bloated deficit and investor wariness of its sovereign debt. World news. Reports of early settlements being found in America of tribes of Caucasian or white people are circulating in the United States. The bodies and remains, along with stone axes and flints only used by Caucasoids in Europe, have been discovered in the ground, dating back as far as 26,000 years ago. This was thousands of years before the American Indians settled in their migration from the Asian mainland. These alleged finds were discovered around the 1970s, and one flint knife discovered on the east coast of America has been chemically analysed as being of French-European origin. One World at 8 reporter commented, "Anything that proves the European race travelled or even existed thousands of years ago is not reported in the media. Here is our report. There were white Europeans 10,000 years on the North American continent before the ancestors of the American Indians, who were of Mongolian descent and origin." Russia has stepped in to try and ease the tensions between the UN and Syria. Russia has proposed a UN Security Council resolution on Syria that would extend the UN mission in the conflict-stricken country without any threat of sanctions, diplomats said. This Russian draft has been passed around the United Nations to stop the forced attempts by the West and the UN to back the rebels in Syria and topple the existing Assad government. The Russians have come up with a fair solution which should be acknowledged. The UN has said it falls short of threatening the Syrian government with sanctions against them. Thought for the day, the pain in Spain. I've just spoken to a friend of mine who has come back from a holiday near Malaga in Spain. They are fortunate enough to have bought a timeshare at a time when the cowboys were not selling them, about 20 years ago, and spend several weeks a year there with their children and grandchildren. Having known them many years and envied them this little bit of heaven, and also know them to be the gentler sort of Brit, I was shocked to learn that on the first day of their stay, just 2 weeks ago, they were robbed outside a supermarket near Malaga. This time they had their passports stolen and their credit cards, etc. My friend was so taken aback as the guy just whipped past, took her bag and escaped by motorbike. She couldn't even tell what nationality they were, but from reports from other friends who have actually bought houses in Spain, I would think Roma or something similar. He could have been African, it all happened so quickly. Without going into the emotional and awful business of police, of which they were the 68th in the queue that day, the embassy trips, etc., they did have a good time. My other friend, who has bought a house over there around the same area 3 years ago, has just had metal grills fitted on her house because they've been burgled twice by immigrants. So the grass is not always greener, is it? Now why should a country like Spain be suffering like this? It will and is destroying their tourist industry now. I used to frequent Spain a lot in the late 70s in Madrid and saw Spain under Franco. While some of the people we know didn't like his regime, mainly because they had had it for many years, they would be shocked at what their country has become in so short a time without him. I didn't live there, of course, but I can say that Spain was at its height during those years, before the Great British Getaway, and when Spain, like other countries in Europe, did not suffer from the abusive powers of immigration. Now, from what I gather, when an immigrant lands in a boat or whatever, he is not, like in the UK, given money, home, shelter or food. He is not given free health care, and his children, if he brings them, do not receive free education. There are no benefits in Spain unless you work for them. With the result, many illegals are perpetrating a massive crime wave throughout the country. In an article in Spain Today, Spain's decision to offer the most liberal amnesty to immigrants in Europe has provoked more concern over the future for migration to Spain. Critics say it is opening the floodgates, while supporters claim the government is confronting one of the main issues of immigration. It is claimed that by 2015, 1 in 3 Spaniards will be a foreigner. This startling prediction gives an idea of the number of people moving to Spain. This is the way it reads, moving to, as opposed to coming in by boat illegally and any other way. It denotes people like the Brits who move to Spain and genuinely contribute to the Spanish economy. There are currently 3.69 million foreigners living in the country, or about 8.4% of the estimated 44 million population. And wouldn't you know it, they have a socialist government, and their latest decision is to offer legal status to 700,000 more immigrants who could prove they had a work contract and had lived in the country for more than 6 months. It has proved rather controversial. Immigration Minister Consuelo Rumi last week said the changes will allow the government to bring under control the huge black economy in which many illegal immigrants work. As in Britain, the old socialist argument of ageing populations, being able to tax the immigrants and erase the black crime figures look good on paper, but we all know it simply does not work. Even if most of these illegals are declared legal, they will simply bring in more of their relations or breed. Their monies will still go out of the country and not to the Spanish government. These people are illegal because they are usually unqualified and want to earn money for their families in the countries they came from, in the black market and crime sectors. That is why they go to previously profitable countries. Now even Spain, under their socialist Marxist government, will put these immigrants before their own people, as happens in the UK. It comes out with the old sherry, with the falling birth rate, Spain desperately needs the cash with which these immigrants bring to the system. Without it, the country faces a future deficit and no way to pay for its ageing population. The point against this argument is that with everyday living prices rising in Spain, owing to the rise in population, and property prices falling, the indigenous Spaniard cannot afford children or a place to live, which of course, as we know, reduces the indigenous peoples. European governments are allowing massive immigration from Africa and, in the Spanish case, South America, which will replace the existing population, social engineering at its worst. But how will the proverbial man in the street react as Spain apparently opens its doors to those arriving? Racism is undeniably on the rise and tensions are visible. Residents of one area of Madrid, Villaverde, went on the rampage last week after the murder of one local man, allegedly by a Dominican immigrant. Shops owned by immigrants were attacked and Latin Americans and Africans chased in the street. The European Observatory Against Racism, based in Vienna, wouldn't it be, said Spanish intolerance towards immigrants has hardened and they are increasingly associated with crime and terrorism. And this is what will happen. There are increasingly more what the media calls right-wing groups on the rise in Spain, as well as the pro-Franco people. They can rightly say that Spain under Franco was not all sunshine and light, but he did look after the Spanish that looked after him, and Franco, of all the fascist leaders, did prove that a benevolent dictator can exist, even if they do shoot the ones who vote communist, as indeed I would. The Spanish face the same with a Muslim influx, as indeed we do, only they are of course nearer to North Africa. In Barcelona, bullfighting is now illegal in the Spanish province of Catalonia, and in some arenas have been converted into business spaces. But Muslims want to turn the most famous arena, the Colosseum, into a giant mosque. In fact, some cities in Spain now look more like the Middle East. Muslims who once ruled most of that nation are returning in large numbers. In the city of Salt, Muslims already make up 40% of city residents and will soon be the majority. But the city government has pushed back, placing a one-year hold on a large mosque project funded by radical Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. For good measure, someone cursed the ground at the building site with a pig head that was still there when the CBN News arrived. Islamic law forbids the building of a mosque on ground soiled by pigs. But the number of Muslims in Salt is increasing so rapidly. It is now only a matter of time before Muslims will be running the city. Well, we all know what that looks like, don't we, Bradford? You may think that Spain is a long way away, but it isn't in today's world, and what happens in Europe will impact on what is happening over here. Countries like Spain will soon be dominated by Muslims, whether they are black or coffee-coloured, as we will be. The only difference is the Spanish are more nationalistic than us, thence the pig's head. And remember, they had Ferdinand and Isabella to actually expel their parasites. What have we got? The Queen, local and state systems riddled with the buggers, and a House of Parliament that seems to be breeding them. We stand less chance than the Spanish of ever getting rid because the Brits are not nationalistically inclined as the Spanish were, and are getting to be so again. Spain's problems are fast growing as ours are, and the only thing all the powers that be are doing is forming large paid committees, quangos and groups to tell us that things are not as bad as all that. There is one word I will say, and that is bleep and more bleep. We might well all have to look to Europe for a lead in the way in which we handle this ever-growing problem in this country. Remember, if you are not a part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And finally, this is just an example of how far we British have been pushed down the fine line of ignorance and racial bigotry reversed. An example is that we have a slave museum in England that shows only the history of black slaves. And yet black and Arab slavers from Africa kidnapped men, women, children and babies, mutilated them on the decks of the ships in the name of Islam and sold them in North Africa. In the 19th century, over 1,250,000 whites were taken and sold to black Arab slavers, and not one statue or memorial is allowed to be built in their memory in their own country. Young white girls are still being taken today to serve the sex trade in the eastern markets, so no change there then. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I wish you all a very good night.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the World at 8 reporter comments. It is just another nail in the coffin for our farming industry. Even the French government subsidises its dairy farms. Why can't we Brits look after our own farming industries instead of the rest of the world's? We are an island and should be more reliant on our own farms instead of paying prices abroad for importing stuff we can mostly produce for the masses over here, and already running most of the herds at a loss. This latest cutback is just too much for them, and the farmers face not only the decline of dairy farming, but we face the rising price of milk should some farmers be forced to sell their dairy herd for slaughter. This price cut follows hot on the heels of price cuts in the spring this year, taking many farmers into a 5p deficit on every pint of milk they produce. UK News. The protests from angry dairy farmers from across the UK will soon be heard in London today. They are protesting against the drop in prices of 2p a litre, which they are paid for the milk by the leading milk processing companies Arla Foods UK, Robert Wiseman Dairies and Dairy Crest. At this drop in their price they stand to lose up to $50,000 per year 11th of July. The dairy farmers are not amused. John Terry appeared in court again today for racism. Spanish reveals €65 billion in new austerity measures for Eurozone. Reports of early Caucasoid remains found in America. Russians come up with a fair solution on Syria to the UN. Thought for the day, the pain in Spain.